and welcome to our weekly look inside Syria. I'm Fauziah Ibrahim. Well, it's been a week of major developments in the Syrian conflict. On Thursday, President Barack Obama agreed to expand the level of U.S. military support for the Syrian rebels. Now, the decision comes after the White House said it had conclusive evidence that chemical weapons were being used by the Assad government, an act President Obama has repeatedly described as crossing a red line. The Syrian government slammed the decision, saying Washington's statements were lies based on fabricated information. Meanwhile, the Obama administration is saying little about how or what type of weapons it will provide to the rebels. But it has sparked a new debate about whether peace between the rebels and the Assad government can be struck at the bargaining table. From Washington, Rosalind Jordan reports.
Another day of bullets and bloodshed in Syria. The United Nations says 2 years of civil war have claimed the lives of more than 93,000 people. While the U.S. has decided to arm the Syrian opposition, the Obama administration won't say what types of weapons it will send or when they will arrive.
I'm not going to be able to say, here's the specific list of every type of item that we'll be delivering into Syria. We do want to be responsive to the requests that have been made.
International leaders argue whether that's the right response right now.
Providing arms to either side would not address this current situation. There is no such military solution. Only political solution can address this issue sustainably.
U.S. officials, including the Secretary of State, have talked with many of Washington's allies to explain the shift in strategy, as well as to press for an upcoming peace conference. Among those getting the calls from Washington, the Russians, who have long sold weapons to the Assad government.
The peace conference is already in question, and because of the decision to supply weapons to the rebels, I see the whole basis of this conference being destroyed.
Also unclear how the U.S. will prevent its weapons from falling into the hands of groups such as Jabhat al-Nusra, which the U.S. calls a terrorist organization. Republicans in Congress have long called on Obama to give the rebels weapons, but they say more needs to be done.
It needs American leadership and announce the no-fly zone. Take out the runways with the cruise missiles. If they fill in the runways again, you take them out again. You take out their gasoline, their fuel depots.
Even before the Obama administration can sell its decision to arm the opposition, there's already pressure to ramp up its military involvement in Syria's civil war. Rosalind Jordan, Al Jazeera.
Meanwhile, Syrian opposition forces are asking for more help on the ground. The commander of the main rebel group is urging Western countries to create a no-fly zone. Free Syrian Army Chief Salim Idris is also calling for anti-aircraft and anti-tank missiles.
I would like to tell our American friends and the American people we are preparing now for a big offensive in Aleppo. The regime is trying, supported by the fighter of Hezbollah, is trying to recapture the city and the suburbs. And we are now in most need, and we hope that our friends will not leave us alone facing the troops of the regime and the fighters of Hezbollah and the Iranian fighters.
So, as the U.S. answers the rebels' call for more arms, how does this change the situation on the ground? And what does this mean for the Syrian conflict and the region? Well, to discuss this, we're joined by our three guests. In Istanbul, Khaled Saleh, head of the media office of the Syrian National Coalition. In Washington, D.C., retired Brigadier General Mark Kimmitt, a former U.S. State Department official under President George W. Bush. He also served as Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for the Middle East. And finally, in London, Ammar Waqqaf, a Syrian political activist. Welcome, gentlemen, to all of you. Now, the U.S. has said that the Assad regime has crossed the red line, and they have evidence pointing to this. Does this justify, then, Washington arming the rebels? Mark, if I could start with you.
Well, it's very clear that what we have going on in Syria right now is a brutal regime. President Assad killed over 93,000 people on the battlefield so far, has used chemical weapons against his own people. Washington is responding to a request for arms for the rebels to defend their cities and to defend their people. I believe it does justify the use of arms provision to the rebels, and the United States, along with a number of other countries, is acceding to those requests for arms.
Now, Ammar, what do you think about this evidence that Washington claims to have of a Syrian regime using chemical weapons against its people as well as against the rebels? And, of course, Washington's decision to arm the Syrian rebels.
Well, first of all, I think the United States, 10 years ago at least, they, had the will to go public and, say that we've known about this and that, weapons of mass destructions and so on and so forth. Obviously, it all turned out to be, work of imagination later on. But now what seems to be happening is that they're saying, well, we've got this evidence about chemical weapons being used, A, and B, we are sure that the regime was the one, or the Syrian government was the one to use it, B, and everybody, seems to be believing them without any, show of evidence. And what we see as well is that for the claimed number of 150 people dead, they're willing to support the rebels with weapons, whilst like 90,000 people have been killed so far in Syria, according to the United Nations, but they were reluctant to do so. It's quite dodgy, and I personally don't trust it.
Well, no matter what, Khaled, Washington has made this decision. They say that they will arm the Syrian rebels. They say, though, that they'll start out with supplying with light arms. Now, what are you hearing on the ground? Do you think this is enough to perhaps shift the momentum to your advantage on the ground?
Well, a couple of things. First, I think the United States is sending a signal to different countries in the world that now there's an overabundance of evidence that the regime had used chemical weapons. Of course, this is not the first time that we hear, and I've talked specifically about chemical weapons and the regime using chemical weapons on this show just 2 weeks ago. And at that point, I had mentioned that sources within the U.S. administration mentioned to us that, yes, they have the proof, but they're just making sure that the proof is solid. Of course, we heard the same message from France, we heard the same message from the UK and from the Turkish government. So there's a high-level collaboration of evidence showing that the Assad regime, perhaps one of the most brutal regimes in the 21st centuries, killing 93,000, is willing to use those chemical weapons against innocent civilians. I think just merely sending that signal to the rest of the world is going to shift the balance on the ground. I think the U.S. now is going to be a lot more serious in stopping the Assad regime, stopping Hezbollah militias that are advancing towards Halab, towards Aleppo, and really trying to shift the balance of power.
All right, Mark. Washington trying to shift the balance of power. But you have to see the irony here, though, don't you? In arming rebels and at the same time trying to start peace talks. How would the Obama administration try to reconcile these two actions?
Oh, I don't think there's anything to reconcile. I think if we understand that the purpose of the military action is not to create war, but to force Assad to the negotiating table, then the military assistance makes sense. Look, Assad has no reason right now to sit down and negotiate for peace because he sees himself winning militarily on the ground. So the purpose of the military is a means to an end, using the military power to shift the facts on the ground, to shift the balance on the ground, to cause Assad to understand that he needs to negotiate a peace. That's proved successful in the past. That's what was done to get Milosevic to the table, both in Bosnia and Kosovo, and numerous other times. If Assad does not have a military reason to come to the negotiating table, why should he bother?
All right, well, Ammar, does Assad have a reason to come to the negotiating table? The Syrian regime is definitely on the upswing at the moment, but will President Assad come to the negotiating table now, even though he is victorious?
Well, President Assad, as far as I'm concerned, has publicly already said that they're going to the negotiating table. Those who are reluctant to go to the negotiating table are the opposite party, really, the opposition. They cannot agree to have a unified delegation for a start, let alone having a common objective. But let's go back to this chemical issue. I think the evidence actually, says otherwise or indicates otherwise. 2 weeks ago, in Turkey, Adana, 2 kilograms of sarin were, confiscated with Jabhat al-Nusra, Syrian Al-Qaeda affiliated a group in Adana. It wasn't widely reported, but that's what that's what Reuters at least reported. Carla Del Ponte, the UN investigator, said that actually the evidence says that it was the rebels who were using chemical weapons. So I would say yes, chemical weapons were used.
I'm sorry, I have to disagree with that completely. We've asked for the UN monitors to go into Syria. We've begged actually the UN monitors to go into Syria for 6 weeks. And we've said, listen, come to Sarah.
Well, just Google Carla Del Ponte. Why don't you just Google Carla Del Ponte and she'll tell you what happened. You know, it's really easy. But the issue is that,
can you say that again?
Does really the Syrian government, okay, let me finish the sentence here. Does really the Syrian government need to use chemical weapons to kill 150 people? You know, one air raid can do as such damage. If Syria as a state uses chemical weapons, then I would be expecting to see results like we did in Halabja when Saddam Hussein bombed the Kurds. You know, 5,000 people laid bare on the street and killed. Not 10 people here and 3 people over there. I mean, chemical weapons have been used. I've seen videos that confirm the use of chemical weapons. And actually, some of my friends in Damascus have reported near the Joba area.
I just want to stop you there. Mark, I just want to bring you in. We are, of course, reminded of Iraq. We're reminded of the rumors of weapons of mass destruction. Is this something that the Americans want to be brought in again, with memories of Iraq, with memories of Afghanistan still fresh?
No, I don't think so, and I'm glad you brought that point up. This issue of the chemical weapons, while important, is significantly different from what happened in Iraq. In Iraq, the concern for weapons of mass destruction was a justification for the invasion. In this case, the concern about the use of chemical weapons has simply been a trigger for more involvement. I don't think anybody has any doubt that we want to see Assad gone. I think the world community, with the exception of countries such as Iran and Russia, want to see Assad gone. And in fact, in this case, what you have is a very reluctant American administration who is not seeking involvement, not seeking an intervention, but now feels morally bound to support the people of Syria, and as a result is supplying the arms.
All right, morally bound, but let's just remind ourselves that while Washington may be morally bound, they will still be supplying weapons that will kill civilians, no matter what. Now, let's just pause this discussion for a while and remind ourselves the devastation that has been occurring so far. Now, the war in Syria has gone on for over 2 years now, and while it doesn't look like it's ending anytime soon, the human cost continues to rise. Last week, a United Nations report found that at least 93,000 people have been killed in the conflict. That figure, however, is just an estimate, and the official number could be a lot higher. Now, according to the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, more than 5,000 killings were documented every month since last July. And the UN also found that some 6,500 children were among those killed in fighting right across the country. Now, Khaled, let me bring you in here. Now, the SNC has refused to take part in the Geneva talks. This doesn't show you in a good light, does it? In fact, it shows that you want to continue this conflict. You would want to see that death toll rise even further. Is that right?
Not at all. We did not put any conditions. As a matter of fact, what we said is we
General Idris did
to achieve. We said we want to have what we want to have is a solution that meets the aspirations of the Syrian people, and I think 93,000 is a high enough price for us to say we want to establish a democratic society in Syria. That's number one. We said that any transitional period must start with the departure of Assad. Listen, if you have a serial killer in the United States or in France or the UK or any modern country, he will be chased if he killed 10, 20 people. How about somebody who is responsible for killing over 93,000 people? Now, let me mention a couple of things. I know Assad and supported by Hezbollah militias, managed to capture the city of Qusayr. He still does not have full control over it. But the reality of it, if you look at what's happening in Syria in the last 30 days, you see that the FSA, the Free Syrian Army, is advancing towards the Minna airport. They're advancing in Aleppo. They just managed to capture 2 major neighborhoods in Deir ez-Zor. They managed to capture Division 17th in Raqqa. So yeah, Assad is having small wins that he's able to amplify using the media. But I think overall, the FSA, the Supreme Military Council, is advancing day in, day out.
Ammar, if I can bring you in into this discussion. Now, the Syrian government forces are also guilty of continuing or contributing to these deaths as well, particularly with the help of Hezbollah and Iran. What do you say to that?
Well, I mean, Hezbollah have been accused since the very beginning, and the Republican Guard of Iran have been accused from the very beginning of participating in this. It was only until the Battle of Qusair that we are now, confident for sure that Hezbollah has participated. I don't think Hezbollah has really the luxury of committing a large number of troopers into any sort of battle and evacuating the front with Israel in light of all the accusations and the tension that is going on the Israeli front. So I don't think really Hezbollah has made any significant contribution. The firepower is all definitely there, under the Syrian army's hand, not on Hezbollah. With regards to the messages that we're getting from the Syrian National Coalition, actually, it's very contradictory. Yes, General Salim Idris, the head of the council, military council, I don't know, did say that we're not going to Geneva until we are supplied by weapons. We've heard George Sabra, I think, if I'm not mistaken, saying we're not going until Hezbollah is, condemned and taken out of the equation. They're making all sorts of excuses not to go into Geneva. The only party that has committed actually to the Geneva or diplomatic solution is the Syrian government. But I want to have a small comment on what General Kimmitt said. I totally agree with him. The pledge of supporting the rebels with weaponry is probably not about supporting the rebels with weaponry as much as it is to tell the people that the United States probably and its allies are willing to go all along the way in order to influence the outcome. What we see now on the ground is that the Syrian government is winning. The initiative is with the Syrian government. It has been the case for the past 3 or 4 months, and they're definitely on the ascendancy. And the morale of the rebels is going down and down and down. And they need a little bit of morale boost, A. And B, the Syrian government needs to know, from an American point of view, obviously, is that the Americans are not going to let it win very easily.
Khaled, I want to bring you in on this conversation too, and I want to go back to the situation where Washington has said that they will arm the Syrian rebels. There are, however, concerns that these arms may actually fall into the wrong hands. Now, the FSA is known to have consisted of various opposition groups, among them the al-Qaeda-affiliated al-Nusra Front. How confident are you that these weapons, when on the ground, won't fall into the wrong hands and won't be used against civilians in sectarian violence?
Well, a couple things. After the establishment of the coalition, we established just a few days later, 4 days later, we established the SMC, the Supreme Military Council. It contains 85% of the fighting groups on the ground. They have very clear chain of command for distributing any kind of aid, whether lethal or non-lethal, anything that flows into Syria. They've been audited several times by the United States, by the UK, by the UK government, by France, and they've proven that they only distribute to brigades that are that have all signed to the bylaws of the SMC of the Supreme Military Council. But you can't
guarantee that, can you? I mean, there's a big difference between the comforts of Washington and London to what's actually happening on the ground in Syria. You cannot guarantee these arms that will be provided to you won't be used against innocent civilians.
Well, I can guarantee that because there are mechanisms, there are countries that are monitoring this day in, day out, sometimes on an hourly basis. They're watching everything that happens. It's not happening in a vacuum. They're being very careful. It's to the point that if any of the brigades has a minor fighting with it, somebody who's under 18, they're cut off supply. If there is any brigade that has any foreign fighter fighting amongst its ranks, they'll be cut off supply. So there is a very clear mechanism that's been established and monitored and audited on a regular basis.
Mark, how concerned is Washington that the FSA is in bed, I suppose, with an al-Qaeda affiliated group? Is Washington concerned that they may actually be complicit in sectarian violence in the future?
Well, I think there's every reason to be concerned about that. We've seen over the years a significant amount of al-Qaeda activity in the north. But in many ways, this issue of supplying weapons and those weapons falling into the wrong hands is a bit of a canard. That area is awash in weapons, and whether it's a weapon supply by the United States or by any other country, if the wrong person wants to get their hands on a weapon, they're going to get their hands on a weapon. So what Washington is doing, I suspect, is limiting the quality and the capability of the weapons that are being provided. I don't think you're going to see air defense missiles, surface-to-air missiles provided. I don't think you're going to see anti-tank weapons provided. Those are the ones that Washington would be most concerned about. And I think the best way that they can ensure that they won't fall into the wrong hands is they don't provide those higher-end weapons, which unfortunately is exactly what the FSA needs.
Exactly. Now, Khaled, what do you say to that? Because you're not going to be able to get those weapons that will actually shift the momentum to help the Free Syrian Army.
I think we'll be getting the kind of weapons that we need. I believe the auditing system, and this is something that the United States have tried in the last 6 weeks. They've tested these auditing systems, distribution systems, and they made sure that they are well maintained, that the weapons go into the right hands. Listen, we don't want the weapons to go into the wrong hands. And if you give me the option between cranes, something to rebuild Syria, and weapons, I will choose cranes. I want to rebuild Syria. I want to rebuild the liberated areas and non-liberated areas. The challenge that I have is that Assad is not allowing us to do that. He's using chemical weapons against civilians. He's using Scud missiles. He's using his airplanes to kill civilians. He's a divisive figure that's continuing to kill civilians. And that's the only reason we're having to ask for weapons. Otherwise, we want to focus on rebuilding Syria.
All right. On that note, I do want to move on this discussion and talk about rebuilding Syria. Before you rebuild Syria, however, we need to talk about a political situation. Ammar, how much is the Syrian regime willing to compromise in order to get some sort of resolution to this conflict?
Well, I think the Syrian government is interested in ending this crisis, in a sense, or the revolution, if you want to call it that way, sooner than later. I think they are in a good position to say that, you know, despite 2 years of fighting in order to topple the government, that won't happen because a lot of Syrians actually support.
All right, let me just ask you a very direct question here. Do you think President Bashar al-Assad is willing to step down in order for both parties to come to the negotiating table?
Well, I think that's making a precondition. I think President Bashar al-Assad would step down if he sees that is in the interest of Syria. I think that's a decision to him and a decision to those who support him to make, not a decision to be forced upon Syrians.
We are talking about the interest of Syria here, aren't we? We're talking about the peace solution here, a peaceful solution, a diplomatic, peaceful solution, which actually means him stepping down. What guarantees, you know, can you give, should President Assad be forced to step down, that those who support him won't take up arms against the next government? We're calling for a solution that goes into the ballot box, not for him to be forced down. If that goes to the ballot box, and if he loses the elections, then he goes down in a fair and square game. But if, you know, the international community goes and says President Assad should step down, and, you know, enough Syrians say no, he doesn't, then this will go on and on for generations. Ammar, I want to bring you in. We're just running out of time here, gentlemen. Ammar, just very quickly, what needs to happen for both sides to come to the negotiating table in Geneva?
Well, first of all, the SNC, if they really represent 85% of the Syrian opposition and fighting groups, they need to get their act together, because they definitely don't, or not yet. They need to have an objective, and they need to go there without preconditions. The only thing that we can accept as people who actually do not want, you know, this government to fall down, at least as a framework, is for a ballot box solution to be, you know, to be instituted, whether in 2014 or later on. That's the only fair thing that we can say. And that is the objective that they should enter the negotiations with, not to say, well, the government should go. Because if that happens, then what guarantees, you know, that a lot of Syrians won't get disgruntled on the other side, and they will cause troubles for generations to come.
Khaled, we're just running out of time. A very quick sentence from you. What needs to happen for two sides to come to the negotiating table?
I'm not going to even, I tell you what, I'm not even going to go as far as ballot box, because I don't think Assad cares for that. How about allowing free media? How about allowing Jazeera English to enter into Syria? How about just freeing some of the 200,000 prisoners? I mean, we just want some small goodwill gestures. I'm not going to ask
CNN
for 200,000.
are there, BBC are there.
10,000 of those. You know, they're under monitoring. Like, you know, if any of them reports,
let's get a bit more strategic, really.
The BBC
gentlemen, we are running out of time.
I want something really simple.
Gentlemen, I need to give the last word now to Mark. Mark Kimmitt, what do you think needs to happen in order for us to see some sort of resolution to this conflict?
You know, sadly, because the Assad regime is unwilling to go to the ballot box because they know they would lose, or they're unwilling to even allow chemical inspectors into the country because they know they will demonstrate that they've used chemical weapons. Sadly, I think we're forced to the resolution on the ground, which is to arm the rebels, give them enough power to put the Assad regime on its back feet. Once it's on its back feet, it realizes the only option it has is to negotiate and then get to the negotiating table and come to a resolution that is in the best interest of all the Syrians, not just the Alawites.
Right, gentlemen, we shall see what happens next. Thank you very much for being on the show. We do appreciate it. Thanks to my guests in Istanbul, Khaled Saleh, in Washington, D.C., Mark Kimmitt, and in London, Ammar Waqqaf. And thank you for joining us. Remember, Al Jazeera has extensive coverage of what's going on in Syria, not just on this program, but with our news, broadcasts, and online at aljazeera.com. I'm Fauziah Ibrahim. Thanks for watching Inside Syria.